It is the 1st of May 1945. The Führer, Adolf Hitler, is dead. His private secretary, Martin Bormann, leaves the shelter of the Führer bunker, puts on his SS general's uniform, tucks Hitler's will and political testament into his breast pocket, and sets off under the cover of darkness into the ruins of the crumbling capital of the Thousand-Year Reich. Bormann runs northwest to the train station, tearing his insignia from his uniform, but encounters Soviet troops who tell him Hitler is kaput. He hastily makes off and is spotted running across a railway bridge, but is never seen again. Did Martin Bormann perish in the ruins of Berlin that night, attempting to save his own hide? Or did he survive, remaining the highest-ranking Nazi to escape the ruins of Hitler's Third Reich? Before we begin, we would like to draw your attention to our revamped Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee membership pages, which contain rewards and perks such as early access to our content, merchandise discounts, and audio versions of our videos, along with much more that we give to our valued supporters. If you have not yet signed up to help our cause, we'd like to ask you to please consider doing so, as we need to secure the channel by safeguarding it from possible demonetization, and also invest in better equipment, software, and more people to help us improve our videos going forward. In short, without your contributions, these videos would not be possible. So if you would like to ensure this channel never has to shut down due to demonetization, please spare whatever you can per month and become People Profiles patrons. Thanks for listening. The man known to history as Martin Ludwig Bormann was born on the 17th of June, 1900, in Wegeleben, Prussia, now part of Saxony-Anhalt, in eastern Germany. Bormann's father, Theodor, who was born in 1862, was the son of Johann Friedrich Bormann. He worked as a bandsman in the Halberstadt Cuirassiers before leaving the armed forces and gaining employment as a post office official. Bormann's mother, Antonie Bernardine Menon, was born in 1856 to Tobias and Louise Menon. She married Theodore after he was widowed in 1898, although she herself was widowed when Theodore died in 1903, after which she married Albert Wohlborn in the same year, giving birth to 4 children over her 2 marriages. Theodor Bormann was a successful postal worker and had gained rapid promotion due to his ability to speak French as well as his managerial efficiency, although he had also struggled with poor health since 1900, which led to his early death in 1903 at the age of 41. The loss of his father was a constant source of grief for Bormann, who remained angry at his mother for the rest of his life because she remarried the same year his father died, despite the fact that she had no income other than a small state pension to support her children. The Bormann-Wohlborn household of 1904 was one of curious and tense relationships, with 9 children living together from the various marriages of Theodore, Anthony, and Wohlborn. And throughout this time, Martin remained close only to his brother Albert Bormann, later refusing all contact with his extended family. In 1906, the family moved to Thuringia in central Germany, where his stepfather had found a better-paid job as a bank clerk, and Martin Bormann enrolled in a private school in the town of Eisenach. And then 3 years later, in 1909, the family moved to Weimar in Thuringia, where Martin enrolled as a 4th grader in a state school, but he would soon come to despise his program of education. Weimar was a city deep in the throes of xenophobic and anti-Semitic sentiment, patrolled by nationalists and Wagnerites who viewed other European states as a threat and Jews as inferior, rhetoric which was emphasized in schools and by politicians throughout Bormann's childhood, including by Adolf Bartels, a pastor, poet, and journalist whose writings were renowned for their rabid anti-Semitism and were a precursor to the Nazis' anti-Semitic stance. Indeed, these tensions, which were prevalent throughout Europe, combined with the German declarations of war in early August 1914, sent nationalist fervor into overdrive, and Bormann joined his school friends, marching through the streets of Weimar and singing patriotic songs. Bormann and his classmates were eager to join the fight, and feared that the war would be over by the time they had reached the age of enlistment, a matter which heightened tensions with his stepfather, who had refused to join the army, which deepened Bormann's resentment of him. Failing to excel at school, Bormann's classmates later recalled that he had nil returns from his academic pursuits, failing particularly in languages, literature, and music, a situation which had a lasting impact on him and left him feeling insecure for a considerable proportion of his life. Bormann was eventually drafted into the 55th Field Artillery Regiment in June 1918, although he would later claim that he had eagerly signed up of his own accord, and he served a few relatively insignificant months behind the lines before he left the army in February 1919. After turning in his uniform, he decided not to return to his stepfather's house, and instead search for work elsewhere, gaining employment as an estate manager on the Good Herzberg estate near Parchim in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in northeast Germany. Weeks after moving to the estate, Bormann enrolled in various groups dedicated to anti-Semitic and nationalist ideologies, although it has been argued that this was a move designed to ally himself with the views of his employer, Hermann von Treuenfels, rather than a clear demonstration of his own convictions. But Bormann was later remembered as a detested manager on the estate due to his rude disposition and coarse manner, and one who sacrificed all else for productivity. The economic situation in Germany progressively worsened into the 1920s, aided by estate owners like the Treuenfels, who hoarded grain to create artificial shortages in order to increase its value, a tactic which enraged farmhands and the wider population alike. Discontent on the estate led Bormann and the Treuenfels to employ the now aimless Freikorps members as farmhands. The Freikorps was a former paramilitary organization with close links to the National Socialist movement, and it was employing members of the group that allowed Bormann to take a position of nominal command in the organization, whose members soon gained a bad reputation for their drinking, womanizing, and distinct lack of work. Although Bormann would later boast of his membership of the organization with other members of the Nazi government. Through his work with the Freikorps, Bormann involved himself with a rival to Hitler's National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, called the German People's Freedom Party, which considered itself a more radical alternative, although the party gained very limited support outside of northern Germany. In February 1923, a man named Walter Kadow joined the Freikorps detachment under Bormann's command at Good Herzberg. Kadow was a school teacher and youth group leader for the same political party as Bormann, with a penchant for stealing the money and possessions of his fellows. He joined the detachment wearing a uniform adorned with false medals. Before long, it was decided that Kadow should be removed, although before he departed, his parting shot was to steal 30,000 marks from the estate bookkeeper. Bormann responded by asking all shopkeepers to inform him if Kadow ever returned, supposedly to get him to work off his debts, although this was seen as a spurious motive, as the 30,000 mark theft was relatively minor. It is more likely that Bormann believed Kadow to be a spy, who had given up a German nationalist to the French occupying army in the Ruhr. The Freikorps planned to take justice into their own hands, and arranged a theme, which was a sitting of an internal court for the trial of traitors. This would often result in death sentences and backstreet assassinations, and would later lead to a series of killings, which became known as the Theme Murders. In May 1923, Kadow returned to Parchim, and the trap was sprung to capture him, in order that he may be severely beaten as punishment, and so Kadow was invited to attend a drinking session in a tavern with Bormann's Freikorps associates in the town, where he became catatonically drunk, not noticing that his sober drinking partners were rummaging through his pockets. Kadow was then led away from the tavern and put into a horse-drawn carriage, whereupon he soon realized that he was being led away from the suburbs and into the dark countryside. The men of the Freikorps then beat him to death, one of whom, Rudolf Hess, the later commandant of Auschwitz, bludgeoned him with a maple branch. The party then buried the body and returned to the Good Herzberg estate, informing Bormann that Kadow had been killed, an unexpected evolution of the initial plan simply to have Kadow beaten, and so Bormann quickly devised a plan to keep the murder a secret, although one accomplice, Bernhard Jurich, informed the authorities of the murder, after becoming convinced that he was to be informed upon, leading the Mecklenburg law enforcement authorities to open an investigation into the matter in June 1923. The case was eventually referred up to the state court in Leipzig, which led to Bormann's arrest as a suspect and his subsequent incarceration in Schwerin prison. Even so, Bormann maintained a serene belief that he had done no wrong. In his eyes, a traitor had been killed, and a threat removed from the Freikorps and the wider state, which was an outcome he believed was deserving of praise rather than punishment. The result of the criminal investigation was the release of Bormann in September 1923, when it was demonstrated that he had merely coordinated a plan to have Kadau beaten and not killed, and so he returned to the Goetherzberg estate in high spirits, and proclaimed that he had befuddled law enforcement authorities while serving a purpose essential to the peace. But during the time of his internment at Schwerin, Germany was undergoing great political strife, with Hamburg, Thuringia and Saxony all likely candidates for communist-led coups. The increased threat of leftist violence had forced the state to employ the services of the extreme right, including organizations such as the Freikorps, which allowed them to remain empowered as armed groups in Germany, securing Bormann's position of authority in the group. And in March 1924, Bormann stood trial, alongside Rudolf Hess, for the murder of Walter Kadau, and was given a light sentence of a single year's imprisonment, the court going so far as to say that his intentions had been not wholly dishonorable. Bormann spent a relatively insignificant year imprisoned in Leipzig and was released in February 1925, returning to the estate at Goetherzberg. However, this lull in events was not to last, as Bormann fiercely disagreed with the owner of the estate, Hermann von Treuenfels, on the future of National Socialism, as Treuenfels believed in supporting the old Northern National Socialists, whereas Bormann had a new infatuation, Adolf Hitler and the NSDAP. In May 1925, these disagreements reached their peak, and Bormann left the Goetherzberg estate, driving back to his mother's house in his new Opel Laubfrosch sports car. Following this, Bormann did little between 1926 and 1927, dedicating most of his time to joining and working for the NSDAP's paramilitary, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, led by the bullish Ernst Röhm in their Thuringia detachment. Whilst working for the SA, Bormann made contact with Hans Ziegler, a lone journalist who had developed a largely unheard-of party newspaper, Der Nationalsozialist, joining his one-man operation as a truck driver, accountant and salesman, and gaining employment on the fringes of the National Socialist movement brought Bormann closer to the NSDAP, which he eventually joined in February 1927 with the membership number 60508. His experience working for Der Nationalsozialist allowed Bormann to be promoted to the press office of the regional party administrator, Fritz Sauckel, in November 1927, formally inducting him into the party machine, albeit in a lowly position, and Bormann's skill and adeptness as an administrator were noticed, and he was soon promoted to the head of the press office amongst Sauckel's staff, where he proved to be an effective manager, even working to settle disputes between party offices. However, Bormann was markedly less successful at his short-lived public speaking career, which he undertook at the same time, and was noted for his stutter and tendency for anger when heckled, subsequently leading to his removal from party speaking lists and his banishment to the backrooms of the NSDAP. Bormann made good use of his role as an administrator in Sauckel's office and was introduced to Hitler as the genius behind the party's Thuringia operation. Indeed, Hitler made many speeches in Thuringia between 1927 and 1933, allowing Bormann to maintain relatively close contact with him and his staff, being introduced to his future boss, Rudolf Hess, in the same period. His minor reputation as an effective and dedicated worker had gained Bormann respect in certain circles of the party, although he remained a small fish, reliant on the status of others in his immediate proximity to gain influence, clearly illustrated in 1928, when Bormann was asked to move from Hitler's lunch table to make way for a more important guest, Prince Christian of Schaumburg-Lippe. Nonetheless, 1928 was not an unhappy year for Bormann, who, having been noticed for his keen talent for bureaucracy, had been personally appointed by Hitler to a position in the SA's insurance office. The fact that many of the personal insurance claims made by the SA were a consequence of self-provoked violence meant that few insurance claims were ever met by companies, leading to a crisis over personal insurance provision for SA operatives. Bormann went to work on a plan for an internal SA insurance and relief fund, which was personally approved by Hitler in February 1930, who ordered that all party members pay 30 pfennigs per month towards the fund. And so, with 390,000 members, a significant cash flow was injected into the NSDAP, over which Bormann gained responsibility and thus newfound power. The new SA Relief Fund was made operational the same month, and Bormann was given sole power over who received funds for their insurance claims. He also worked alongside Hans Frank, who was later the Governor-General of the Polish-occupied territories, to ensure that the fund was not subject to taxation, a move which cemented his reputation amongst the party top brass as a shrewd administrator. Whilst furthering his career in the NSDAP, Bormann had fallen in love with Gerda Buch, the daughter of the influential Nazi judge Walter Buch, a close personal friend of Hitler, and at the time they met, Gerda was seemingly the physical opposite of Bormann. With shining eyes and pretty blonde hair, she stood 4 inches taller than her future husband and countered his brutish manner with a warm, innocent disposition. For all their differences, Gerda was seemingly entranced by Bormann and begged her father to have him over for dinner, to which he reluctantly agreed, viewing Bormann as a rude, promiscuous bureaucrat, unsuited for their polite company. In April 1929, after only a few months of courtship, Bormann asked Gerda to marry him, after falling behind her parents on a Sunday walk, a development which received a lukewarm welcome in the Buch household. But nevertheless, the wedding was arranged for September of 1929, and due to Walter Buch's status, was attended by Adolf Hitler as well as Rudolf Hess. 7 months later, the couple had their first child, who they named Martin Adolf Bormann in honor of Hitler, and by March 1930, Bormann had been promoted to the staff of the SA, a group which Hitler intentionally kept few in number. But despite his promotion, Bormann held no rank or command, and was considered by others to be somewhat of a paper pusher. However, the image encapsulated by Bormann was one which Hitler was increasingly eager to project, designed to give the impression that the NSDAP was a party of elective government, not of street fighting and revolution. The Wall Street crash of October and November 1929 had ruined the German economy, an event which Hitler hoped to capitalize on in order to propel the Nazis into government in what he termed a revolution at the ballot box. And so the role and image of the SA was therefore to be reformed, a task embraced by Bormann with his creation of the SA-affiliated National Socialist Automobile Corps, or NSAK, in April 1930, a carpool, the rules of which demanded that all members of the NSDAP submit their automobiles for party use, as and when required. Hitler too submitted his Mercedes compressor, although only symbolically. Bormann remained in sole command of the NSAK for a brief time, although the volume of work associated with the Corps soon warranted a separate team, headed by Adolf Hühnlein, a veteran of the November Putsch of 1923. Bormann was subsequently transferred to become the head of the relief fund he had designed between 1928 and 1930, and returned to a status of relative anonymity. Hitler's redesign of the NSDAP into a party with the potential for election saw its first success in the Reichstag elections of September 1930, in which the party won 107 seats, or 18.3% of the national vote, and whilst reform had led to political success, it also faced a great deal of opposition from the revolutionary SA, who threatened Hitler with a coup led by Pfeffer von Salomon. On hearing of the coup, Bormann informed Hitler, leading to Salomon's dismissal and the appointment of Ernst Röhm as the head of the SA, under the supreme command of Hitler himself. The coup led to a wider reform of the NSDAP structure, with loyal bureaucrats like Bormann and Hess rewarded for their faith with influential positions in the new hierarchy. Hitler met with his new band of officials in restaurants and cafes, often speaking late into the night about his visions for Germany and Europe, although Bormann, living a fair distance outside of Munich, was often unable to attend these late-night conferences, and instead had to rely on the patronage he received at Hitler's lunchtime meetings, which often took place at his favorite restaurant, the Osteria Bavaria. The first impression that Bormann made upon many of his colleagues was not a good one, as they often noted with disdain that Bormann was unrefined, loutish, and overbearing in his friendliness. However, what did undoubtedly impress the others was his capacity to work around the clock, and he also gained a reputation for the brutality with which he treated his subordinates. After the election of September 1930, Hitler formed a new shadow cabinet in order to signify his commitment to making the NSDAP an electable party, although Bormann never made it onto the list, remaining a somewhat anonymous administrator on the fringes of power. But despite his failed attempts to become part of Hitler's core team, he was nonetheless an influential figure within the party, a view evidently shared by the Weimar government, who dispatched secret police officers to search his home in 1931, although they returned with no evidence of illegal activity. Bormann's role as a backroom administrator continued to win in power into the 1930s, and by 1932 his office was handling over 3 million marks in the insurance fund alone, a sum which he was willing to make available for all party activities. Hitler respected Bormann for his capacity to work and viewed him as an effective and honest aide, a confidant upon whom Hitler could rely without fearing an ideological clash, and in March 1932, Hitler called Bormann into his study in the party's Munich HQ, the Brown House, to inform him and others that he was trailing behind the incumbent Paul von Hindenburg in his attempt to become president of the Weimar Republic. Hitler had only invited yes-men to be with him in this time of failure, and left other bombastic ideologues such as Joseph Goebbels and Ernst Röhm in Berlin. The next round of the presidential election was held a few days later, on the 10th of April 1932, which saw Hindenburg claim victory, although Hitler did win another 2 million votes. But on the 31st of July 1932, new Reichstag elections were held, the NSDAP winning 230 seats and 37.3% of the popular vote. And although another election in November 1932 lost the party 34 of their seats, they remained the largest political party in the legislature. In the same election, the Communist Party won 100 seats, making the contest a two-horse race between the hammer and sickle and the swastika. Their success in the elections of 1932 drove the NSDAP to form a new political central committee under the command of Rudolf Hess, with Bormann transferring over in 1933. The party also enhanced its new image by moving its offices to Berlin on the 17th of January 1933, and following the resignation of Chancellor Kurt Schleicher on the 28th of January, Hitler went into talks with Hindenburg, emerging 2 days later at midday to proclaim that he was the new Chancellor of Germany. Party members who had aided the movement before 1933, like Bormann, were held in high esteem and entitled to wear the gold party badge as a sign of their dedication, an honor which would later help in their promotion within the party. And March 1933 saw further Reichstag elections, and with the Communist Party banned, the Socialist Party in a state of collapse, and the Nazis cemented into power, no further elections were to be held in Germany until after the end of World War II. The role of the SA was rapidly diminished after this final victory, as few political opponents remained, and Bormann, knowing that his relief fund was soon to be cut back, wrote to Hess and asked if he required any aid in his office. Hess, now deputy party leader and a woefully poor administrator, was eager for the assistance of the party's preeminent bureaucrat, and promoted Bormann to become the chief of staff in the Hess Bureau, a position which he formally took up on the 3rd of July 1933. Whilst this was an important promotion, Bormann's power did not immediately increase, as he was initially the only other staff member in the Hess Bureau and did not gain command over his own team. However, Hess himself was almost immediately sidelined once in office due to his lack of political talent, being what Hans Frank termed a hopeless but dreamy weakling. When Bormann arrived 5 months after Hitler's victory, he realized that the Hess Bureau, also known as the Amt Hess, had effectively become a disputes office for those in power, designed to shield Hitler from the petty squabbles of his new cabinet. They were, in effect, the guardians of the no man's land that protected the Führer's throne. But regardless of its somewhat boring task, the Amt Hess provided great opportunities for power, allowing Bormann and Hess to play kingmaker amongst warring elites, and promoting networking with officials from all across the party and state. In September 1933, Hess was given the formal title of Deputy Führer, and Bormann the rank of Reichsleiter, the second highest rank possible in the NSDAP, which he shared with various other officials. And in October 1933, Hitler ordered that all party matters and requests be sent to the Amt Hess before being distributed to their appropriate ministries, including Hitler's personal office in the Reich Chancellery, a command which allowed Bormann and Hess complete discretion over all information at the highest echelons of power. This order also allowed Bormann to attend cabinet meetings, albeit as an official without portfolio, but it is the view of many historians that Hess exercised little actual power in his capacity as the head of the Amt Hess, preferring to maintain his image as a party man of integrity. This, along with his increasing hypochondria and use of astrologers, resulted in a lack of power and weakened reputation for Hess, allowing Bormann almost total control of the office and its staff, who considered him a tough but loyal boss, even working to get his lawyer, Heinrich Himmler, a promotion within the NSDAP. June 1934 saw growing concerns about an insurrection from the SA reach their peak, with the Night of the Long Knives, a purge led by Goering and Himmler against key members of the SA, leading to the execution of Ernst Röhm on the 1st of July 1934, and Bormann, increasingly taking the place of Hess as his department's representative, worked alongside Hitler to tick off the names of those he wished to be killed. Once again, Bormann was an accessory to murder. The events of June and July confirmed the supremacy of the Reich government over the state of Germany and further centralized power to its offices, including the Amt Hess, but reportedly Bormann did not believe the largely fabricated evidence that Röhm had intended to overthrow the Reich government and remained unfazed. But regardless of its validity, the purge had empowered him and his office further, and his suggested replacement for Röhm, Victor Lutz, was accepted. By mid to late 1934, Bormann had been semi-co-opted to Hitler's personal office, with Hess becoming progressively less interested in matters of state, allowing Bormann greater access to the Führer as the de facto representative of the department. Indeed, Bormann was now responsible for briefing Hitler, and used the opportunity to note down his thoughts and orders, with the intention of winning greater favour with him as a reliable aide. And during this time, Bormann's diary reveals key signs of the closer relationship with Hitler, noting in early 1935 that he had ridden with him in his supercharged Mercedes for the first time. Hess attempted to further centralise power in October 1934, when he requested that Gauleiters or district party officials should communicate at all times with central government through the Amt Hess, a proposition which they rejected, continuing to use their own channels. But when Bormann and Hess complained of this to Hitler in December 1934, he ordered that Bormann chair all meetings at which Gauleiters were present. Bormann willingly accepted, and ordered his Gauleiters to submit information on their activities to him on a monthly basis. Bormann's power on the local stage grew alongside his influence at national level, taking a massive upward swing when ailing President von Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934, giving Hitler complete power over the Reich's civil service, command of which he placed in the hands of Bormann. And so, wishing to demonstrate his new authority, Bormann took a shot at Hindenburg's former chief of staff, Otto Meissner, accusing him of being out of step with the NSDAP and its values, forcing Meissner to profess his support and demonstrating the supremacy of the Amt Hess over all levels of the civil service. Moreover, Bormann used his new position to establish a civil service training corps, giving him discretion over all staff employed by the Reich, an important power which Bormann could use to win influence in staff bodies across all government departments. Bormann also used party loyalty and values as his justification for banning the wearing of non-NSDAP medals and the use of titles which were not recognized by the state, a move which, despite having a limited impact, was key in building Bormann's intended image as a defender of the doctrine and integrity of the party. This new position as a defender of the NSDAP gave Bormann an excuse to keep extensive files on party members, including those at the very height of power, supposedly in order to prevent corruption, but which also gave him great power over rivals in the contest for Hitler's patronage. From 1934, Bormann increasingly emerged as a party influencer and was treated with appropriate respect, albeit begrudgingly, with Richard Darré, the Reich Minister for Agriculture, appointing Bormann to the Agricultural Ministry, allowing him to sit on departmental boards. Another key player of whom Bormann was wary was Himmler, although he made an alliance with him in 1937 when he backed Himmler's request to hand internal government surveillance powers to the SS. They cemented their coalition by spending Christmas of 1937 with one another. By 1938, Bormann had gained a monopoly over party doctrine and internal legal disputes, appointing a large team of lawyers to his entourage, ensuring that he was the final voice of authority on all party matters, and Hitler's trust in Bormann as an aide increased as the 1930s progressed, and in 1935 he was given effective command of the Hitler Fund for German Trade and Industry, formed supposedly to advance cultural programs and trade in Germany, although used as a personal hoard for many of Hitler's own projects, affording access to several million Reichsmarks. This hoard allowed Bormann to green-light various projects desired by Hitler, such as setting up a fund for performances of Hitler's favourite operettas, including Die Fledermaus and The Merry Widow, in addition to purchasing homes for Hitler in Munich and decorating them with fine art in 1938. Despite the Reich Ministry of Finance expressing their concern, Bormann would unconditionally provide Hitler with the funds he needed, and by 1945 it was estimated that 305 million Reichsmarks from the fund had been spent on various projects ranging from purchasing property to renovating the city centre of Augsburg in Bavaria, which alone cost 140 million marks. Indeed, the fund was most famously used for the redevelopment of Hitler's mountaintop retreat, the Obersalzberg, on the Austrian border, which by 1936 had been expanded to 4 times its original size, with 30 rooms and 3 stories, presented by Bormann to Hitler on the 5th of July, 1936. The project was Hitler's pride and joy, earning Bormann the right to build his own property on the same spot of land, complemented with a complex road network leading to the Führer's residence. Bormann's ruthless purchasing of land and the scale of his construction program won him a local nickname, the Lord of Obersalzberg, and in September 1936, Bormann started construction on a tea house at the very top of the Obersalzberg, which would later become a favourite location of Hitler when he visited his retreat. Hitler increasingly favoured the Obersalzberg as a seat of government, and Bormann, as the head of the household, was able to exercise discretion over whom was permitted to enter the premises, giving him additional powers to safeguard the Führer's patronage. Moreover, as his house was now located on the same plot, Bormann was able to stay up with Hitler into the early hours of the morning as he ranted and listened to his operettas, a role which advanced Bormann's relationship with the Führer and allowed him to translate Hitler's ravings into orders, furthering his position as a reliable aide. Life at the Obersalzberg was intimate, with Bormann accompanying Hitler on his daily walks to the tea house and remaining with him late into the night, a close proximity which earned Bormann even greater favour with Hitler. This manoeuvring soon paid off, and in 1938 Bormann was given a promotion to the Reich cabinet as one with important government duties as an advisor to the Reich Chancellor and the Führer, and 2 days after his promotion, Bormann accompanied Hitler to Vienna, and this time Hess was not invited. The German annexation of Austria was performed shortly afterward. On the 12th of March 1938, Bormann accompanied Hitler on his advance into Austria and stood in his entourage as he performed his first speech as the new Führer of the state, although his presence remained largely unpublicized. As well as this, Bormann shadowed Hitler closely for the remainder of 1938 and accompanied him to that year's Nuremberg rally and to Hitler's beloved Wagner Festival at Bayreuth. September 1938 saw Neville Chamberlain received at the Berghof in order to deal with the Sudeten crisis, which eventually concluded with the Munich Agreement, ceding the Sudetenland to Germany, a move hailed by many as preventing World War. The Lord of Obersalzberg had played host to one of the most significant meetings of pre-war German history. This ever-closer relationship with Hitler empowered Bormann, as he was able to invoke the name of Hitler with unparalleled authority, and thus was the case with Robert Ley, the head of the German Labour Front, when he attempted to limit the number of staff in the Amt Hesse with a complaint addressed to Hitler, which was read and responded to by Bormann, who informed Ley that staffing numbers were the sole jurisdiction of the Führer. Few were inclined to argue against the professed will of Hitler, especially when cited by a man so close to him. This was a source of immense power for Bormann. By October 1938, Bormann's office at the Hesse Bureau was formed of 3 main structures. These were departments for drafting legislation, resolving and administering party matters in all German states, and for running the civil service. This gave Bormann influence in all sectors of Hitler's government. Indeed, Walter Buch, Bormann's father-in-law, stated at Nuremberg that he believed Bormann had gone mad with power and used any position of authority he gained to ruthlessly advance his status. But during his ascent to power, many felt sorry for his wife Gerda, whom Martin bullied and belittled, as Bormann would whistle to call over his wife as if she were a dog, and would punish her severely for small indiscretions, such as forgetting to iron his shirt. Gerda reportedly held a wholehearted belief in the Nazi doctrine that female emancipation was a Jewish phrase, and remained submissive and loyal, regardless of her husband's many extramarital affairs, eventually coming to bear 10 children between 1930 and 1943. But although Bormann was a strict father and regularly beat his children, he did appear to genuinely care for their well-being, and often wrote to Gerda, instructing her to remind their children not to accept rides from strangers. Bormann also used his children to get closer to Hitler, and delighted in showing them off to the Führer, who delighted in their innocent chatter. But with regard to his wider family, Bormann remained distant, effectively severing all ties with his extended band of siblings, and rarely talking to his mother, whom he still blamed for replacing his father. And as he gained power, Bormann progressively reduced contact with his family, replacing them with Hitler and his entourage instead. Bormann's first individual policy program was targeted at the church, which he despised. Indeed, while Section 24 of the Nazis' 1920 program did cite a commitment to positive Christianity, many Nazis remained opposed to the church and believed it to detract from the highly centralized power base which Hitler wanted. Between 1937 and 1938, Bormann turned his newly acquired firepower against the church and ran a highly publicized campaign investigating widespread corruption and pedophilia within the church and banning party members from joining the clergy. He also used his close relationship with the Führer to pass a new mandate in 1938, which made Hitler the godfather to every 10th child born to any one mother in the Reich, a proclamation passed with no prior consultation with Hitler. Hitler's direct approval was no longer needed for his policies, but Bormann could introduce new programs purely on the basis that they fulfilled the Führer's general outlook, using Hitler's name as if it were his own, and all Bormann had to do was delicately mention the church at dinner, provoke Hitler into a rage, and then discreetly write down all that he said. The transcript of each tirade could be twisted to authorize any program he wished. This advantage was used by Bormann to sideline all opposition, and when Hans Kerl, the Reich Church Minister, wrote an essay defending the church, Bormann simply had it banned, on Hitler's authority, with Kerl dying the following year in 1939. Moreover, Bormann wholly embraced virulently anti-Semitic views, although reportedly more as a consequence of the NSDAP's position as opposed to a particular personal ideology. Bormann never mentioned membership of any anti-Semitic organizations before he joined the National Socialist movement, and it was said at Nuremberg that he gained a lot of his information about Nazi racial pseudoscience from the newspapers. However, this was to be no barrier to his significant role in the implementation of anti-Semitic policy in Nazi Germany, with Bormann playing a vital role in drafting, signing, and passing anti-Semitic legislation and policy. The 1935 Nuremberg race laws, which legally defined Jewishness and removed citizenship and rights protection from Jewish, Black, and Romani people, owed much of its legal content to Bormann, as did the order in August 1938 for all Jewish men to adopt the first name Israel and women Sarah. Furthermore, it was Bormann who planned and co-signed almost all anti-Semitic legislation in the Reich and was convicted at Nuremberg in absentia for war crimes and crimes against humanity for his actions. November 1938 saw the development of the Kristallnacht pogrom, or Night of Broken Glass, a retribution against Jewish citizens throughout Germany following the killing of diplomat Ernst von Rath by a 17-year-old Polish Jew, an event of which Bormann would have been aware in advance, although no evidence links Bormann to its planning. Although on the evening of the 9th of November 1938, Goebbels informed other top Nazis of developing violence against the Jews, with shops and synagogues smashed up and burned, and Jews brutally attacked, in over 91 cases leading to death. But Bormann appeared unconcerned, and waited until 2:56 a.m. on the 10th of November to issue an order to his men stating that Jewish businesses should not be burned, citing concern for damaged goods rather than the danger posed to Jewish families. 1939 soon dawned, the inaugural year of the Second World War, and in August of that year, Hitler finalized his plot to invade Poland, the code name for which was Operation White, gaining the support of the Soviets on the 23rd of August with the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Toward the end of July and into August, Hitler hosted secret planning conferences at the Berghof and also inside Bormann's house, with Bormann noting in his diary on the 25th of August that German military mobilization was ongoing, after which Poland was invaded by the Nazis on the 1st of September 1939, with Britain and France declaring war on the 3rd, news received by Bormann as he sat in the antechamber to Hitler's office in the Reichstag. A few days later, Bormann accompanied Hitler to the Eastern Front in his armoured train to provide assistance in liaising with government departments back in Berlin, and with Hitler now playing general in Poland, Bormann was trusted with representing the Führer in German politics. Whilst he was posted to Poland, Hitler's official chief of staff, Philipp Buhler, and his doctor, Karl Brandt, had begun a program of mass murder against disabled citizens in what the Nazis referred to as a euthanasia scheme. This was a program which Hitler had requested in August 1939 in order to rid the state of bad blood, targeting those with disabilities and incurable illnesses, including children, and subjecting them to poisoned gas, killing a total of 300,000 citizens throughout the Reich. And in another show of merciless megalomania, Bormann had lobbied hard for command of the program, named Action T4, but was eventually sidelined in favor of Buhler and Brandt. By September 1939, the public had received word of the program, and regional party bosses wrote to Bormann asking how they should deal with a progressively more outraged population. Bormann replied doggedly that the response was to be determined by Buhler, as the program was within his jurisdiction, realizing that the fallout would prove politically fatal to both Buhler and Brandt. Hitler was outraged and verbally ordered Brandt to curtail the German element of the program in August 1941, which nonetheless continued outside of Germany as part of the system of concentration camps known as Action 14F13, and so Buhler, as Hitler's official secretary, had fallen hard out of Hitler's favor, just as Bormann was reaching the apex of his power. In Poland, which was already being terrorized by the Nazis' Einsatzgruppen killing squads, Bormann saw a new avenue for power, which he shifted into high gear when Hitler announced his desire for a harsh struggle between nationalities in newly occupied territories in late 1939. Bormann exercised his power to appoint regional party officials to new zones of influence, and deliberately selected some of the most fanatical and brutal Nazis to take command in Poland, ordering a new system of laws, which included a total ban on sexual relations between Germans and Poles, as well as a command that intelligent Poles be killed, and so Bormann's system of laws were passed, although they did prove overly excessive on the ground, and Hans Frank, the Nazi Governor-General of Poland, complained that the brutality of the laws remained intolerable for soldiers and citizens alike. When the Reich Ministry of Justice suggested in 1940 that Poland be subjected to German law, and therefore brought under its departmental jurisdiction, Bormann refused, arguing that Hitler's desire for a harsh struggle would be impossible under German legislation, an argument which he won, it being announced in 1941 that Poland would remain under its subjective laws. Once he had sidelined the Ministry of Justice, Bormann suggested a new judicial system of trial and punishment for Poland, which included three-man courts made up of an NSDAP representative and 2 police officers, as judge and jury, restricted to delivering 2 sentences for those found guilty, either internment in a concentration camp or hanging. Hitler supported Bormann and requested that judicial authority in Poland be exercised by party officials and not the Ministry of Justice, and by 1941, Bormann had secured his place as the executor of Hitler's vision in the occupied territories of Poland. Bormann was a vital aid to the development and implementation of anti-Semitic and genocidal policy throughout these new territories, closing loopholes in proposed legislation and developing new techniques to ensure that none could be overlooked by the Nazis' murderous gaze. He also instructed his regional officials to ensure that all enemies of the German people were immediately interned in concentration camps. However, an unexpected development was to occur on the 11th of May 1941, when two of Hess's staff members arrived at the Obersalzberg. White-faced, they reported that the Anglophile Hess had flown off in a Messerschmitt 110 to England in an attempt to negotiate a peace deal with the Allies. Hitler flew into a blind rage and expressed a wish that Hess crash into the North Sea and drown. Bormann and Hitler weren't concerned about Hess revealing state secrets, as by 1941 he had become so sidelined that he knew little important information. However, they were fearful that the public response to this news would undermine the Nazis' authority, and so Hitler, Bormann and Goebbels promoted the story that Hess had gone insane, citing his own incoherent last letters and increasing reliance on astrologers and soothsayers as evidence, which largely saved the government from a significant loss of support. Bormann instantly denounced his former boss as a traitor and effectively avoided all scrutiny over the matter, being promoted 3 days later by Hitler to the position of Chief of the Reich Party Chancellery, and so the Amt Hess was dissolved, and Bormann's new office was renamed the Reich Party Chancellery in May 1941. Bormann's first act in office was to obliterate Hess from the state's collective memory, and he employed the Gestapo to remove all images and textual references to Hess, as well as arresting those connected to him, including his university lecturers, whilst announcing a campaign against mesmerists and astrologers who had supposedly caused Hess's madness. On May 29th, Bormann was formally made a minister of the Reich, and circulated a memo informing all officials that he now worked directly under Hitler, and as such all orders from the party chancellery should be taken as if they were Hitler's word. And by June 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union had been initiated, and Hitler was effectively locked away from all party officials, leaving Bormann alone as the unchecked representative of the Führer to all non-military staff. Realizing the threat from Bormann's newfound power, Robert Ley, the head of the German Labour Front, attempted to appeal to Hitler, proclaiming that his office had jurisdiction over the careers of party officers and not the party chancellery. Bormann combated Ley by simply refusing to pass any of his complaints on to Hitler, and eventually wrote back to inform him that Hitler supported the party chancellery and had additionally ordered that Ley turn over all of his data and intelligence to Bormann's office. Bormann's monopoly over access to Hitler had rendered Ley impotent, and demonstrated to all in government that he was the sole political voice of the Führer, with no way of checking whether or not Hitler had actually mandated what Bormann proclaimed. The power of the Reich Party Chancellery was advanced further in January 1942, when Bormann passed a regulation which codified the role of his office, formalizing his power over the civil service and demanding that all correspondence with Hitler be sent through his office, closing all unofficial backdoors to Hitler which had developed since 1933, proclaiming Bormann as the new dictator of the anteroom. Following the Wannsee Conference of January 1942, at which it was decided mass killing programs should be performed in the East, Bormann ordered his officials to pursue this new policy with ruthless severity, coded language designed to kickstart the most severe years of the Holocaust, the operations of which were predominantly handled by Himmler and his SS. In August 1942, Bormann was able to further his campaign against the Church when Hitler mandated him with the authority to announce the view of the party on all religious matters, and so Bormann announced massive levies on the Church and ordered that if churches were unable to pay, then their assets were to be seized, leading to the dissolution of many monastic communities, such as that at Klosterneuburg in Lower Austria. By mid-1942, Hitler spent the majority of his time at his underground headquarters, the Wolfschanze, or Wolf's Lair, at Rastenburg in East Prussia, with Bormann in close attendance. Whilst there, Hitler would often remain in bed until late morning, receive his military staff, and then call a private conference with Bormann, who would note down Hitler's orders and relay them to Berlin, being called back to Hitler's room for supper, remaining with him well into the night, sometimes until 4 a.m., a routine which afforded Bormann only a couple of hours sleep every night. Bormann continued to use the Reich's consolidated influence in Poland to order the enslavement of the Slavic peoples, and on the 19th of August 1942, he mandated that they should work for us. Where we have no use for them, we shall let them die. And so, the dictator of the anteroom had once again demonstrated his ruthlessness in the pursuit of power. By late 1942, Hitler had formed a new three-man team to take on his political role, as the war in the East developed into a more serious long-term conflict and became more time-consuming. This new team, the Committee of Three, was headed by Bormann and included General Wilhelm Keitel and Hans Lammers, the head of the Reich Chancellery. Keitel was a soldier and knew little of domestic politics, and Lammers was a cautious civil servant, remaining under the control of Bormann's office, leaving Bormann as the de facto chief of this new cabinet. Göring said of Bormann at the Nuremberg trials that he was privy to the most intimate of the Führer's affairs and had outmaneuvered all other opponents by 1943 to become Hitler's most trusted associate. Indeed, Bormann had control over all information which reached Hitler and could deliver news in such a manner as to shape the Führer's opinion in his favor, manipulating Hitler to agree with his own worldview. Acting as Hitler's mouthpiece allowed Bormann to exercise the Führer's power, even allowing him to demand that Goebbels submit all advanced copies of his newspaper, Das Reich, to Bormann's office for proofreading in 1943. This near-universal power was formalized on the 12th of April 1943, when a memorandum signed by Hitler proclaimed, "As my personal assistant, M. Bormann will bear the title Secretary of the Führer." The title had not been awarded uncontested, as Goebbels and Albert Speer, the Reich Minister for Armaments, had arranged to meet with Hitler in March 1943 to suggest that Göring gain greater power, claiming that Bormann could not be trusted. The meeting was going well, until an aide interrupted to announce that Nuremberg was being bombed by Allied warplanes, and Göring's Luftwaffe had failed to protect the Reich. And so Hitler was too enraged to hear Goebbels and Speer defend him any longer, leaving Bormann the only candidate for promotion. Bormann struck back at Goebbels in June when he wrote a smug note to the propaganda minister, informing him that his speeches were substandard, and that Hitler was not to be bothered with incomplete drafts. Bormann was showcasing that he was, at this point, untouchable. Throughout this period of 1942 to 1943, Hitler and his generals had experienced a turning tide. The war was no longer going in Germany's favor, and the advance of the Soviets and then the Allies from the East and West brought the realization home that Germany would not emerge victorious. And as the fighting wore on, the Reich was posed with the ever greater threat of invasion, made clearer following key losses on the Eastern Front, such as the Soviet relief of Leningrad in January 1944 and the Allied invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June. Bormann had, until this stage, remained relatively impotent in military matters, although he gained a new realm of influence when he suggested the formation of a civilian auxiliary military force designed to defend Germany, later called the Volkssturm. Then the 20th of July 1944 saw the crisis brought to Hitler's inner sanctum when Colonel Claus Von Stauffenberg attempted to assassinate Hitler by planting a bomb near his seat in the Wolfschanze, Hitler's eastern headquarters, known as the Wolf's Lair. Bormann received intelligence that a colonel had been seen leaving the room immediately prior to the explosion and sent Gestapo officers to investigate, leading to Stauffenberg's arrest and execution the next day. This attack on Hitler severely damaged the Führer's trust in the non-partisan Wehrmacht and convinced him that his trusted party officials should take command, and so he promoted Himmler to the head of the replacement army. Bormann issued an order on the same day of the attack to all regional officials that only the party should be obeyed, and that all orders from the Wehrmacht would be disregarded if contradictory. Later in July, Bormann managed to convince Hitler to sign an order which mobilized all party members in a military capacity for the defense of the Reich, putting Bormann in command of his own army, Hitler subsequently giving a speech in which he effectively announced that the Reich was entering a struggle for its survival. He then ordered the Gestapo and regional officers to arrest and execute all those suspected of being traitors to the Reich. This included many influential Wehrmacht generals, and Bormann indicted Gunther von Kluge and Erwin Rommel as enemies of the state, leading to their suicides under pressure of execution in August and October 1944 respectively. With the brass of the Wehrmacht removed, Bormann expanded his own army, the Volkssturm, to over 1 million troops in October, although in reality it remained unimpressive, formed of ill-trained civilians with few weapons, in fact, an army of idealists. But regardless, the tone of Bormann's letters from October 1944 show an arrogance flowing from his belief that he was a great general, ranking alongside Himmler and Göring. By November 1944, Bormann anticipated the loss of millions of civilians in the coming battle for Germany, and ordered a new emergency marriage scheme alongside a new program of forced adultery, suggesting that each male could have 2 or 3 mistresses in order to increase population levels. Indeed, he also anticipated the risk of increased air raids and had shelters constructed for his family and staff at the Obersalzberg. The dawn of 1945 saw the Reich in a desperate condition, with Bormann and his staff working 18 hours a day, attempting to maintain control and order over a state which would cease to exist just a few months later. February 1945 saw Hitler approve Bormann's request to create a women's defense battalion and his order to have deserters hanged in the street as a deterrent to others. And with the state in ever greater ruin, Bormann isolated Hitler more than ever, banning many officials from meeting with Hitler for months on end, lest they worry him with bad news about the war. And Bormann even banned Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's court photographer, by fabricating a doctor's report, claiming that he had a dangerous and contagious disease. With the advance of the Allied and Red armies, the German population grew increasingly demoralized, leading Bormann to order the most fanatical officials to take propaganda roles in order to inspire the population as 1945 progressed. In a bid to maintain order among soldiers, Bormann commanded that deserters be shot or hanged without delay, and for fortifications to be installed around every German city from March 15, 1945. By this time, Hitler and his entourage had moved into the underground bunker in Berlin, which would become Hitler's final resting place in February. The situation had become ever more desperate, and Bormann ordered that cyanide capsules be distributed to the population for use in the event of an emergency, whilst ordering his party officials to uphold Frederick the Great's maxim of win or die. On the 15th of March, Hitler inspected troops stationed near the front line, which was located not 60 miles from Hitler's bunker, and Bormann reprimanded his regional officials for displays of pessimism, whilst issuing them with false identity papers so that they could escape capture when the regime was inevitably defeated. The 20th of April saw Hitler's last birthday celebrations take place in Berlin, with Bormann writing bluntly in his diary that it was not exactly a birthday situation, unfortunately. Bormann had planned to move Hitler to the Obersalzberg on his birthday, as capture by the Allies would be preferable to capture by the Red Army, who surrounded Berlin, although by the end of the day, Hitler refused, stating that he would rather die than fail to stand in Berlin. Therefore, whilst the majority of Hitler's staff flew south, Bormann and a skeleton staff remained with Hitler in his bunker, and on the 22nd of April, Hitler announced his resignation and proclaimed that Göring should be the new leader of the Reich, although changed his mind a short time later. However, Göring was erroneously informed that he had become the new leader and sent a telegram thanking Hitler for his new appointment, which led Bormann to accuse Göring of treachery. Bormann ordered Göring to step down from all positions he held, and an hour later, Göring's resignation was sent through, and on the 25th of April, Bormann wrote a note in his diary which said that Göring had been expelled from the NSDAP, next to the sentence, "Berlin surrounded," which was underlined. On the 28th of April, Bormann received intelligence that Himmler was attempting to negotiate peace with the Allies, prompting him to label Himmler another traitor. And the same night, the commander of the German forces in the north, SS General Hermann Wegelin, as an employee of Himmler, was executed, with Admiral Karl Donitz taking his place. After being informed that Soviet tanks were a few hundred meters south, at the Potsdamer Platz, Hitler married Eva Braun on the afternoon of the 28th, and appointed Bormann as party minister, with Goebbels taking the title of Reich Chancellor and Donitz president of the German Reich. 2 days later, General Keitel telegrammed to say that nothing could be done by the reserve armies to defend Berlin, and Hitler's head of security, Brigadeführer Wilhelm Münke, informed Hitler that the bunker could not be held for more than 3 days. Hitler woke at noon and asked Bormann to relay his orders of promotion to Donitz before summoning his officials together and shaking their hands, calling Bormann "my most faithful party comrade." Hitler then shot himself at 3:30 p.m. His body burned outside the bunker with 50 gallons of petrol. With Hitler dead, the remnants of the Nazi government attempted to arrange a ceasefire with the Soviets, who refused, wishing to press home their advantage before the Allies arrived in Berlin. It was then announced on German public radio that Hitler had died fighting at the head of his army, with a newly empowered Donitz ordering the arrest of Bormann and Goebbels in order to centralize power to himself. Bormann put on his SS general's uniform, tucked Hitler's will and political testament into his breast pocket, and prepared to depart with various other political leaders. Goebbels and Bormann said their farewells on the 1st of May, the former committing suicide at 8:30 p.m. Under the cover of darkness the same night, Bormann set off in the second of 3 groups and ran north to Friedrichstrasse station, by chance running into a German panzer column, which was attacked. The tank next to Bormann was hit and exploded, knocking him to the ground, although coming to. Bormann sought cover in a shell hole. He managed to escape in the confusion of the battle and ran onto the deserted railway tracks at the station, tearing the insignia from his uniform. Running northwest to the Berlin Hauptbahnhof station, Bormann met Russian troops who mistook him for one of the poorly equipped members of his Volkssturm and offered him cigarettes, joking in broken German that Hitler was kaput. Bormann hastily made off and ran onto the railway bridge spanning the Spree River at Invalidenstrasse before biting into his cyanide capsule and dying minutes later. Bormann was tried in absentia at Nuremberg and convicted of conspiracy to wage a war of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and was sentenced to death by hanging. Indeed, it was believed for many years that Bormann had fled to South America, as attempts to recover his remains were unsuccessful. In December 1972, a construction worker found Bormann's skeleton, the glass from his cyanide capsule still in his jaw. And in 1998, the body was formally identified as that of Martin Bormann, after fragments of the skull were subjected to genetic testing. Bormann's skeleton was then cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea in 1999. Martin Bormann remains one of the lesser-known members of Hitler's inner circle, although he has received increasing attention from academia in recent years, as the power structures of Hitler's cabinet continue to be scrutinized. Bormann was the chief mechanic of a system responsible for mass murder, and willingly aided in advancing the ability of the Reich to capture, intern, and kill perceived enemies of the state. Bormann's undeniable lust for power was complemented by his immense capacity to work, shrewd ability to play the bureaucratic game, and willingness to abandon all else in the pursuit of influence. What do you think of Martin Bormann? Was he a mere opportunistic sycophant, or was he a cold, calculating, and ruthless schemer, whose total focus was the obtaining and maintenance of his own power at any cost? Please let us know in the comment section, and in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.